a character I played which was modeled closely after my father, who's been a tailor for the past 40-odd years in Singapore. And it was essentially a story of how my family came to Singapore and how my father lived through this country. The things he saw, it was essentially a combination of Singapore's history and my family's history through the eyes of a tailor.
Welcome to another episode of YanaTV, where we have authentic conversations with impactful and conscious people of Asia. My name is Yana Fry, and today in the studio we have Rishi Budhrani. I don't have to introduce him because you know he's one of the most famous, in my humble opinion, probably the most famous stand-up comedian of Singapore.
Yes, I do a bunch of jokes to drunk people in bars and attics around the country and the world. That is my claim to fame.
How do we actually know each other? I attended your show recently.
You did, yes.
With my friend, I came to your show, and that was, I will try to do with my accent. Can I make you a suit, mate?
Close enough. That's
how do I say it?
Better than how the original character says it, actually.
So please tell me in your...
This was a show called Can I Make You a Suit, Mate?
Right.
Essentially, it was a character I played which was modeled closely after my father, who's been a tailor for the past 40-odd years in Singapore. And it was essentially a story of how my family came to Singapore and how my father lived through this country in the years between 1965 all the way till present day. And the things he saw, it was essentially a combination of Singapore's history and my family's history through the eyes of a tailor. That's what it was.
And I love how clever it was done, because it was comedy, but it was also highly educational. And I actually want to learn more your personal journey preparing for the show, because it was a very personal show. And I assume you had to do some research and dive into family archive, maybe go to those places.
Yep.
Let's talk a bit about this.
Sure.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, like you say, have seen me do stand-up comedy for a large part of my career. At least that's what I'm largely known as. What people don't know is that even before I started doing stand-up comedy, I trained as an actor. I was hosting a lot of events, especially Indian weddings. And I've always enjoyed the process of writing, producing, acting. And doing this particular show, which was so close to home, which was so close to me almost discovering and rediscovering certain things about myself, my parents, my family, my ancestral home, even digging deep into a little bit of ancient religious history even of my people.
Yeah.
Not all of these points made it to the show, obviously, but it was an interesting journey because it forced me to learn certain things and unlearn certain things.
What did you learn? What did you unlearn?
I learned that if there is no evidence, you can't believe everything that you hear. I'll give you an example. I was sitting with my grandmother's brother, my granduncle, over some Kingfisher beer in Ahmedabad, which was my grandmother's first hometown when she crossed over after the partition of India and Pakistan. So essentially, she was born in this place called Sindh, which is now modern-day Pakistan. So when she crossed over into the new India, she settled in this place called Ahmedabad in Gujarat. I went back there, visited some family, and over a few drinks, one of my granduncles, he says, you're not going to believe this, but your great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, apparently used to be a cloth merchant in Italy, and he met Gandhi on one of Gandhi's trips out to Italy.
Right.
Pre-internet,
pre-social media, so no proof.
Pre-partition even, pre-47. And I'm like, wow, that's a wild story, man. He's like, yep, it is. So that's one of the wild stories I heard, that apparently there's a family...
But is there this picture? I mean, do you think it happened?
Do I think it happened? I don't know. There's no pictures of this. There's no imagery. There's no, a lot of things I did not believe even when they told me.
You're a skeptic. For someone who is a comedian, you're very skeptical.
But I trained as a journalist, you see.
Right.
So I'm always, even with my own family, I'm like, are you sure about this? Come on, really? Gandhi? Yeah. Maybe not.
Okay, you learned. Okay, this is what you learned.
Example of things
Yes.
that I learned.
Yeah,
right?
unlearned.
I unlearned that there are some character traits of my community.
Well, now I'm getting really curious.
Yeah.
Tell me.
So I come from the Sindhi community, which is a very small section of the Indian community. And there's a lot of stereotypes about the community. You know, people say that we are very stingy, very miserly.
No kidding.
Yeah. It's been a thing, man. And a lot of times we are given this very bad rep about it. And I think going deep into the family history, going deep into the community history, I learned to, or rather I unlearned that this is a negative thing, that this is a problem. And digging deep enough, learning deep enough, helped me to understand that a little bit better. Helped me to understand how this group of people was displaced in a very early part of their lives, how these people were almost victims of a very trying time, like a lot of communities in the world are. It helped me understand that for this community, a lot of things were taken away from them even before they were able to start their lives.
Yeah.
So it offered a little bit of insight, a little bit of explanation as
why
to
it is the way it is.
why they are the way
There's
they are.
always a reason.
Yeah, of course, we can all try to be better and learn and try and undo certain things, but this helped me be a bit more patient with my own people.
And it's also interesting because if you look at any other culture, I would say anyone or subculture, there's always those myths or those ideas that might be misunderstood,
Yep.
but actually, or not liked. But actually, if we look at the history, just what you said, and to ask question why actually it happened and where it happened and when,
Yep.
then it teaches us to be more kinder to each other.
I do believe
for the
so.
lack of the better word.
Yeah, I do believe so. I think there's always going to be people who try to label a positive trait of yours as a negative label. For example, even in this case, someone who's the negative label is that you're very stingy. But if you look at it in a positive way, you are actually frugal about your spending. You're cautious about what you spend money on. So I've learned that maybe there is value in trying to look at the positive traits of the people we are connected to.
Your parents,
Yep.
when you were doing this research, clearly you need to have, especially with your father,
Yep.
you needed to have numerous conversations. Was there something you learned about your father only while doing research and not before?
So many things, Yana. So many things.
What was it really kind of struck you?
What struck me most is this revelation that maybe we all, in a way, have, but are not able to articulate. That I think Asian elders, Asian parents are not as emotional as we think they are. They just are not able to communicate their emotion. And that's why this was a very interesting exercise, because I found myself saying things and people would ask me, and they're like, hey, Rish, was this a line that your father actually said? And I found myself thinking, well, no, not exactly, but
I'm sure he felt it
yes,
and I expressed it.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So it was almost like an amalgamation of two characters. Like after I interviewed my dad and I spent time with him and I researched with all the family members and tried to put the pieces together, as the character playing this man, I figured if he was alone, which is what theater is, right? I'm not talking to like 350 people. I'm essentially just putting my life there alone. If I was alone in thought, how would this character express these emotions that he has? And that's what certain things were. That's what I discovered about my father. As much as he comes across as someone who maybe doesn't express himself emotionally that much, I think he's actually a very poetic human being.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Which brings up to me the very famous languages of love. I mean, the 5 languages of love that I think we all know about, we all have.
Yeah.
And one of the languages of love is actually deeds. It's the things you do.
Right.
And I think particularly for the father, it's a lot about providing for the family, making sure that you're safe, making sure you have food on the table, you have books for your school. So that's that goes without saying anything.
Yep. To them, that is their language of love.
Exactly.
There's one language of love that I have with my partner now, for example. My language of love is looking for clean toilets for her when we are traveling overseas.
I was just going to say, you're going to come up with something, yeah.
I think it's an underrated...
It's underrated language of love.
Important, to
Yes.
go like, hey, we need to find a clean toilet. I'm like, I gotcha. And then I'll be like, excuse me, can I use the toilet? Can my wife use the toilet in this restroom? Yeah. So.
My husband would also sign up with you for that. Not clean toilet, but he would say that his language of love towards me to make sure I get exactly the food I want. Exactly the food I want. So back to your story.
Yeah.
Your mom.
Yes.
Your story is about your father, but of course, as a woman, I have to ask these questions because often I find, sometimes women, especially in the generation of our parents, they tend to play more supportive role and often not spoken about that much.
Agreed.
So I'm sure you spend time also with your mom to just understanding. What was your learning from having conversation with her?
I think because the focal point was not her in this particular story, it's weird almost, but the focal point has been her my whole life. I feel like I was raised largely by women. And my wife tells me I've got a very gentle and feminine side to me.
You do?
I'm like, yeah, well, that's because I spent so much time in my formative years with very loving and caring and gentle women who would also, a lot of times, not hesitate to beat the crap out of me if I was being out of line.
Yeah, which is also very important.
I think that is an important trait. And I didn't have that same connection with my father growing up. I spent a lot of time in the shop. I spent a lot of time watching him at work. But I never got a chance to be an adult and sit and have a beer and go like, hey, this time that this Nigerian dude walked in with a briefcase full of cash, what happened there,
And he's like, son, another beer.
He's like, we need to open a few more beers if we want to go down that rabbit hole. So we did that this time, over the past few years, especially during the pandemic. And after that,
I was just wondering, yes, was it the pandemic that actually triggered this idea in you? You want to spend time with your father to understand more?
Yeah, I think inevitably, because we are both business owners, although he had, encouraged me a lot to go out there and become a professional, a working professional. But when we found out that I became a business owner, just like him in a way, took a risk in an industry that is almost very niche in this part of the world, I think he began to appreciate certain risks I was taking. He was more open in sharing with me his experiences. And I think that's, in a way, gave me a lot of insight into who he was as a person, which I didn't necessarily know or maybe couldn't necessarily articulate before these experiences with him.
I love that. Your mom, what is the biggest anything you learned from her?
I think my mom has always been someone who's so giving, and I always knew she was very talented. She was she is educated, she's talented in a lot of ways, but I think the generation which she came from, like you correctly pointed out, there was almost an expectation for women to play the supporting role. And I think she did fight a lot of battles to maybe break out of that. And she won some and she lost some, is what I learned. I was very heartened to hear about some of the battles she won, and also very sad to hear about some of the battles that she lost. And I think as a kid, maybe you heard certain things in the household, like, mom wanted to try and start this business. Unfortunately, this couldn't happen because of X, Y, Z. And then you're like, oh, okay, too bad. At least mom's home with us.
Yeah.
But as an adult who's now maybe her age when she was trying to do all these things, thinking, oh man.
Yeah.
I really
you really feel for her.
Yeah, I wish I was in a position to help her fight those battles with. And I also learned that my parents are best friends of each other over the years.
That's very rare and very precious.
Yeah, I learned over this period as well, and this is a quote that I heard from a writer and a poet. He talks about his own marriage, and I think there's a lot of truth in it, because he says that my partner and I are such good friends that even marriage couldn't ruin our friendship.
I love that one.
I find that a beautiful line.
Yes, this is a beautiful line. So the final question for today.
Yes.
What do you think you still would like to realize is your biggest dream?
My biggest dream. Oh, this is going to sound so weird, but
Please enlighten me.
when there was an exercise I did when I was in university, where one of the professors told us to write down what our biggest dream would be when we left university and before we die. And
Smart professor.
smart professor, and I put down, and I still maintain, I just want to be remembered
How?
for something meaningful, for something that maybe meant something to people beyond my time on this earth, whether it's a lesson or a writing or a book or a movie, whatever it may be. But I feel like if the people, if I'm gone and the people who are still here long after me can learn something from my life, that is probably the closest thing to a dream I have that I would like to leave behind.
Thank you so much, Rishi.
Thank you for having me.
That was Rishi on YanaTV. I really appreciate this kind of conversations, especially it's a wonderful reminder for all of us to actually talk to our parents. And we can learn so much. And yes, I mean, when we're kids, when we grow up, we care, we don't care. But then when we become adult, and COVID also showed it, sometimes they leave sooner than we expect. And if they stay, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to actually have a conversation and ask them about their life. And if this episode inspires you to do at least that, I find we remembered. So thank you, Rishi, for being here today.
Thank you.
See you
for
next
having
time,
me.
guys.
I think there might be some other comedians who disagree with that.
Please comment. Please do reach out and say that was not true. I'm the one who's going to invite you into the show.